fire on American culture. There isn't any. America stripped the cultures away from all who came here in order to hammer them into the good little uniform consumers that were wanted. The culture of America is one of endless consumption and breathtaking arrogance. That's not really true, because it's literally impossible to have a group of humans and not have a culture. But it's hard to see your culture from the inside. And yes, there are negative things about American culture. I mean, obviously. But after spending over a year outside the US, here are some things I noticed about our culture. We are casually generous. I'm going to the store. You need anything? Does not carry a requirement of paying us back. The other Americans in my program thought nothing of buying one of our British friends a soda or something, whereas when our British friends got each other a drink or something, they paid each other back. And if you're in trouble, Americans will literally offer you the shirt off their back. Or, in the case of one Brit I had a conversation with, a job to a stranger who needed it. America is brightly colored. I don't know how else to phrase it. Europe isn't drab, but like the US, like brightness, light, and color. It's the first thing I noticed when I got home. Everything was more saturated. We are genuinely curious. We aren't always as polite about it as we should be, but usually if we're asking about your culture, it comes from a good place. We genuinely love cars. I'm not saying this is a good or bad trait, just that it's part of our culture. We like to drive a lot more than people in Europe. We are diverse. I was walking home with one of the other Americans and we were chatting like, I don't know, a couple weeks after we'd met, and she was like, okay, I don't want to be weird or anything, but like, is it just me or is it so white here? We agreed that yeah, it was, but that, white people came from somewhere and the UK is one of those places. But when I was gone, I really missed seeing faces that looked nothing like mine. There are, of course, other ethnicities in the UK, but compared to the US, where literally half the population isn't white, it's definitely a striking difference. And as a consequence of this, our food is way more diverse. We didn't strip these things from their cultures. The vast majority of restaurants that have, say, Chinese or Thai or sushi or Indian are run by people who immigrated here, brought their culture here, and adapted to the goods available to them in their new country. That is a natural, normal process and a long-existing part of human migration. And because we have so many more cultures here, we are lucky to be able to take part in what they share with us. It isn't always a benign process, but it's just wrong to say that it's always about us stealing from them. We talk about our problems, i.e., we're very self-critical. We aren't always good, but we spend a lot of time looking at our culture and our country, breaking it down into pieces and examining those pieces. We argue about how to make them better. A lot of times we suck at it, but at least we're having the conversation and the argument. We hate authority. It doesn't matter what your politics are, chances are you dislike and distrust the government. We're rebellious, and few things make us more pleased than giving the man the finger or seeing someone else do it. British people protest. I literally saw an anti-Brexit protest march by my window, but they plan a time, politely show up, and politely voice their displeasure, and then go home after cleaning up behind themselves. Americans? We fucking riot! Part of the entire point of the mall in DC is to yell at the government every time we don't like what they're doing. We hate that we need a permit to do it. We're always looking for new and creative ways to question authority. I think this is why it bothers a lot of us when people from other countries are like, why don't you do something about blank? Like, we're trying. Trust me, we're trying. I don't know, that's just some random stuff I noticed after living somewhere else for a while. Yes, other things. Americans smile a lot. Europeans can tell the American in the room just because the American will auto-smile at random passerby. Smiling is a greeting as much as hello is, and it's a way of talking. When I talk to American friends, I'm nearly always smiling slightly, and my tone rises and falls constantly. My European colleagues do not smile nearly as much, and have much flatter speaking tones. Americans are ultra-casual. After you graduate from school, everyone is going to introduce themselves by their first names. Actually, sometimes even in college, professors will do that. Euro and Asian colleagues tell me that in their home countries, professors act like gods, and it's very difficult to disagree with them. One side effect of the casualness also plays into friendliness. Americans are what Europeans consider friendly on a very frivolous surface level, and colleagues of mine have been confused by strangers who they thought spoke to them like friends, but it's just the American attitude of being casual toward everyone. A German colleague told me that even the notoriously rude parts of this country, like the Northeast, are still friendlier towards strangers than most of Europe. Building on what @Kjeidil said about Americans love cars, road trips. Road trips are such a staple of American culture. Americans are much chiller about driving long distances than typical for Europeans, and cross-country road trips are a staple of American media, often considered almost a rite of passage. And yes, Americans often have a much deeper-seated distrust of authority than Europeans. It often doesn't look like it, especially due to the Trump phenomenon. But even that's a type of backlash against authority. It also doesn't express itself well. Our government has eroded a lot of freedoms that Americans are relatively unaware of, but mostly in the realm of privacy. For both good and for bad, the particular form of the American obsession with freedom comes very much in a "don't tell me how to live my life" way, regardless of enforcement. I.e., I have a strong sense from growing up in this country that if everyone knew they were spied on all the time, but the government actually did nothing with that information, that would be fine. On the flip side, if the government set how to live your life laws in place but didn't check up on anyone or enforce it, Americans would be rioting in the streets. Basically, it's a libertarian streak that runs through the entire political spectrum. Additionally, it's difficult to talk about a monolithic American culture because our entire nation is nearly as big as the entire continent of Europe, so it might be more fair to talk about regional cultures. For example, the note about diversity being part of American culture strikes me as a very regional thing, and very urban. But it's ridiculous to say that America has no culture when each regional culture is, definitionally, an American culture. As the person above me said, it can be hard to notice your own culture until you move elsewhere. But then you notice it, hard. I moved from the northeastern megalopolis to Colorado. Different areas, different cultures, but both are American cultures. I guarantee any American that if they left the country entirely and went to live in another country for a while, they would start to realize what pieces of culture they no longer encountered, both in quintessentially American things and in quintessentially my region of America things.